The dust on Erebus never settled. It was a fine, gray powder, the ground-down bones of a world that had died 1 billion years before humanity found its corpse. It coated everything, a permanent shroud that muffled sound and stole color, leaving only shades of decay. The colony, officially designated Terraforming Outpost 734, was a smear of rust and flickering lights in a perpetual twilight, huddled under a sky the color of a day-old bruise. No one called it by its designation. To the 1,000 souls dumped here, the cast-offs and the politically inconvenient, it was simply the graveyard. Kalen watched it from the flimsy railing of his watchpost, a ghost observing a city of ghosts. He had been a soldier once, an echo in the Compact's most elite phantom unit, the kind of man whose name was scrubbed from official records before he even took his first oath. They were the instruments of unification, the bloody hands that secured the fragile peace the politicians celebrated on the core worlds. He had done things in the name of that peace that made sleep a foreign country, acts of such precise and brutal efficiency that the Compact, once the war was won, could no longer stomach the sight of the weapons it had created. So they sent him here, not a prison, they'd said, but a stewardship, a quiet, dignified end for a man who knew too many secrets. He was the security chief of the graveyard, a warden in a prison with no walls, only the slow, grinding death of monotony and poison air. The others, the miners, the engineers, the disgraced medics, they were all serving their own quiet sentences. They left him alone. They saw the stillness in his eyes, the way he moved with a predator's economy, and they understood that the silence around him was a warning. It began not with a bang, but with a whisper, a faint, sub-vocal hum that wormed its way through the colony's comms network. At first, it was dismissed as atmospheric interference, another of the graveyard's many groans. But then people started to change. It started with the miners in the deep shafts, men already half-mad from solitude. They'd complain of a song stuck in their heads, a melody with no notes. They'd lose track of time, stare at their hands as if they were alien things. And then the paranoia would set in. They saw betrayal in the eyes of their comrades, heard threats in the static between transmissions. Fights broke out, bloody and senseless. Then came the change Kalen had seen once before, in the last dying days of the Rimward Rebellion. Their memories began to unravel. A man who had spent 20 years in the mines would forget how to operate his rig. A woman would look at a picture of her children and feel nothing but a cold, hollow dread. The local administrator, a bloated bureaucrat named Valerius, called it containment fever, a psychological rot born of isolation. He issued tranquilizers and broadcast calming platitudes that were swallowed by the ever-present hum. Kalen knew better. He had heard this song before. It was the hymn, a ghost weapon from the Unification Wars, a psychoacoustic virus designed to turn a population's own minds against them. It didn't just kill, it erased, turning people into violent, terrified strangers before their bodies finally gave out. The Compact had sworn it was dismantled, its architects executed, its very existence classified into oblivion. A lie. Another clean, convenient lie. The chaos spread from the mines to the central habitat. Neighbor turned on neighbor. The shared history that held the fragile community together fractured and then dissolved. A cook poisoned a mess hall, convinced the others were plotting to steal his rations. A hydroponics tech flooded the greenhouses, screaming about voices in the vents. Valerius sealed himself in his office, and the official security forces, a pathetic collection of corporate thugs, fell apart. They were just as susceptible as anyone else, their authority melting away with their sanity. Through it all, a single silent star appeared in the bruised sky. It wasn't on any of the colony's star charts. A sleek black ship, shaped like a sliver of obsidian, that held a geostationary orbit. It fired no weapons. It sent no warnings. It simply watched. And as Kalen stared at it through a scavenged telescope, the last piece of the puzzle clicked into his mind with the cold, hard finality of a rifle bolt sliding home. This wasn't an attack. It was an audit, a field test. The graveyard was a laboratory, and its 1,000 souls were nothing more than lab rats, twitching and dying for the benefit of the silent observers above. The hymn wasn't just being used, it was being perfected. The Compact hadn't just exiled him, they had put him in a cage and were now testing the bars with a phantom's touch. The rage that rose in him was an old, familiar friend. It was cold, clean, and absolute. It burned away the years of dust and decay, and in its fire, the Echo was reborn. He moved through the spiraling chaos of the colony, not as a security chief, but as the ghost he once was. The official command structure was a corpse, so he built his own from the wreckage. He found Anya first, in the ship-breaking yards at the edge of the colony, a place where decommissioned freighters were torn apart for scrap. She was a woman made of wire and spite, with grease under her fingernails and a mind that saw systems and schematics where others saw only junk. She was a cynic, a convicted data thief who trusted machines far more than people, but she hadn't yet succumbed to the hymn. The constant, deafening shriek of plasma cutters and grinding metal in her workshop seemed to interfere with the signal's frequency. "They're watching us die," Kalen said, his voice flat, wasting no words. He pointed toward the black star in the sky. "That ship is broadcasting the signal. It has the counter frequency, the cure." Anya looked from his dead, calm eyes to the sky, and for the first time, the perpetual sneer on her face faded. "And how do you plan on getting to it?" "Echo, flap your arms and fly." He then found Jax, passed out in a shuttered medbay, reeking of cheap, synthesized liquor. Jax had been a combat surgeon, one of the best, until he'd been caught selling military-grade narcotics to fund a gambling addiction. His hands, they said, could stitch a man's soul back into his body, but he couldn't stop them from shaking unless he was half drunk or high. Kalen kicked the bottle from his hand. "Get up," he commanded. "People are dying. I need your hands, not your pity." Jax blinked up at him, his eyes slowly focusing. He could hear the screaming from outside, the distant, rhythmic banging of a man trying to break down a door with his own head. He had seen the symptoms, the memory loss, the violent psychosis. He had thought it was a plague. The look in Kalen's eyes told him it was something far worse. "What's the plan?" he slurred, pushing himself up. "Something stupid. I hope. I'm tired of sensible plans." Kalen gathered a few others, a heavy machinery operator whose family had been consumed by the madness, a communications tech who had managed to isolate the hymn's frequency before her equipment melted down, and 2 grizzled miners who communicated more in grunts than words, but knew the colony's labyrinthine tunnels better than the rats. They were a crew of the damned, broken pieces of a broken world. None of them were heroes. They were just the last ones standing who weren't screaming at the walls. They couldn't fight the ship. They couldn't outrun the hymn. And calling for help was a death sentence. The compact was the enemy. Kalen's plan wasn't one of warfare or escape. It was a heist. A desperate, suicidal, single-shot gamble. It was an Echo's plan. One that used the enemy's assumptions and the environment itself as a weapon. At the northern edge of the colony sat the ore launcher, a colossal magnetic cannon built to fire multi-ton slugs of raw minerals into orbit for collection. It was a relic, mostly decommissioned. But Anya's eyes lit up when Kalen explained his idea. A mass driver. She breathed, a slow, wicked grin spreading across her face. You want to use the ore launcher as a boarding torpedo. The plan was insane. They would reinforce an old, deep earth mining pod, strip it down to its essential systems, and load it into the cannon's launch chamber. They would be the bullet. Anya calculated the trajectory, the velocity, the terrifyingly small margin for error. Jack stocked the pod with every medical stimulant and trauma kit he could scavenge. It wasn't about winning a fight. It was about surviving the impact and getting what they came for. Their goal wasn't to destroy the ship, but to perform a surgical strike aboard it, find the broadcast source, and either steal the counteragent or broadcast the ship's own secrets across the system. Expose the lie. Let the core world see what their piece was truly built upon. As they worked, the sounds of the dying colony echoed around them, the screams, the weeping, the unnatural silence that followed. It was the soundtrack to their desperate labor, a constant reminder of what they were fighting for, not for a flag, not for a government, but for the memory of the people they had been, before their minds were stolen. The final hours were a blur of frantic work. Anya bypassed the launcher's safety protocols, her fingers flying across a holographic interface. Jax injected them all with a cocktail of stabilizers to help them withstand the crushing G-forces. The two old miners, silent as ever, secured the final bolts on the pod's makeshift heat shielding. Kalen stood before them, his face illuminated by the eerie glow of the cannon's charging capacitors. "They think we are animals," he said, his voice low but carrying in the cavernous chamber. "They think we're specimens in a jar, twitching until we die. What we do now is for the ones who can no longer remember their own names. We are not just fighting for a cure. We are fighting to be remembered." He looked at each of them, his gaze lingering for a moment. He saw fear, yes, but beneath it, he saw a hard, defiant spark, the spark of those with nothing left to lose. They were the graveyard's last will and testament, a final, desperate act of defiance aimed at the heart of their silent gods. With a groan of tortured metal, the hatch on the mining pod sealed shut, plunging them into a cramped, humming darkness. Anya's voice crackled over the internal comm. Trajectory locked. Firing sequence initiated. Hold on to your souls. The deep, resonant thrum of the ore launcher's capacitors reached its crescendo, the sound of a waking giant. Through the pod's tiny, reinforced viewport, Kalen could see the obsidian sliver of the enemy ship, hanging in the bruised sky like an unblinking eye. It was impossibly far, impossibly silent. Then, with a cataclysmic roar that shook the very foundations of the world, the cannon fired. A bone-shattering force slammed them back into their seats as they were hurled into the twilight, a rusted metal coffin full of ghosts, screaming silently toward the heavens. The transition from inertia to motion was not a journey. It was an amputation. One moment they were a static object, a metal seed in a cannon's breech, and the next they were a concept of violence, a thing defined only by its velocity. The G-forces were a physical entity, a lid-lined blanket that crushed the air from their lungs and tried to force their spines through the front of their chests. Darkness swarmed at the edges of Kalen's vision, a hungry, swimming blackness that tasted of iron. He fought it, focusing on the single, steady green light of his harness lock, a tiny star of stability in a universe of pure, screaming force. Beside him, he could hear Jack's grunting, a strained, rhythmic sound that was half curse and half prayer, as the former surgeon fought his own battle with consciousness. It was Anya's voice, distorted by the strain and the comms, that cut through the physical hell. 60 seconds to impact, she rasped. Shielding is holding, barely. Hull integrity at 89% and dropping. We're glowing like a damn welding torch. Kalen forced his head to turn, the muscles in his neck screaming in protest. Through the thick, quartz-like viewport, Erebus was gone, replaced by a swirling void, and growing in that void, swelling from a point of light to a shield of obsidian, was the target, the ship. It wasn't firing. It wasn't maneuvering. It was just waiting, arrogant in its silence, either unaware or utterly unconcerned. That arrogance, that clinical detachment, was the Compact's signature. They didn't believe a rat could chew its way out of the cage, much less leap for the throat of the scientist. 30 seconds. Anya groaned, her voice tight with pain. Prepare for the stop. The word stop was wholly inadequate. It was like calling a supernova a flicker. The impact was a symphony of annihilation. The pod's reinforced nose, forged from the drills that chewed the bones of Erebus, struck the ship's hull not with a clang, but with a deep, resonant, world-breaking thump that was felt more than heard. A shockwave traveled through the pod, a seismic event that turned the interior into a blender. Metal screamed, sheared, and buckled. A support strut tore loose and whipped past Kalen's head with the hiss of a guillotine. The world dissolved into a cacophony of screeching alarms and shattering equipment. Then, as suddenly as it began, there was silence, a profound, ringing silence, punctuated by the slow, rhythmic hiss of a ruptured oxygen line and the frantic, ragged sound of his own breathing. He was hanging upside down, held in place only by the harness that had dug deep into his shoulders. Blood trickled into his eye from a gash on his forehead. "Status," he grunted, the words scraping his throat raw. A weak groan came from Jax's seat. "Alive, I think. Everything hurts." From the comm station, which was now part of the ceiling, Anya coughed. "Well, the good news is, we're inside the ship. The bad news is, so is most of our pod. We're a metal splinter in its side. Hull's compromised, but the breach sealed itself around us. Smart metal. Cute." Her voice was shaky, but the familiar venom was still there. That was a good sign. Kalen unclipped his harness and dropped to what was now the floor, his magnetic boots clanking against the buckled deck. The two miners were dead. One had been impaled by the strut. The other's harness had failed, and he was a broken smear against the forward bulkhead. There was no time for ceremony. He turned to the comms tech, a young woman named Elara. Her eyes were open, wide with a terror that had nothing to do with the crash. A thin line of blood trickled from her nose. She was muttering to herself, a single, looping phrase. The song is so loud, so loud, so loud. The hymn, here, at its source. It wasn't a whisper. It was a psychic scream. Jax, pulling himself from his wreck of a seat, saw it too. He stumbled over, a med scanner in his trembling hand. Her neural activity is off the charts. It's burning her out. We don't have much time. He pressed a high-potency neuroblocker against her neck. She shuddered and went limp, her eyes closing. She's stable, for now. But we're all exposed. That cocktail I gave us won't last forever. Kalen nodded, his gaze sweeping over their prison of wreckage. The outer hull of the pod was fused with the sleek, black hull of the ship. Anya. Can you cut us out? Anya was already working. Her portable interface plugged into a still sparking conduit. Holographic schematics flickered around her. The ship's internal atmosphere is breathable. Minimal gravity. But it's already deploying repair drones to this section. Little spider-looking bastards. Give me 2 minutes to find a seam, and I'll burn us a door. The 2 minutes felt like an eternity. The low, insidious hum of the hymn was a constant pressure, a migraine clawing at the inside of Kalen's skull. It wasn't a sound, it was a feeling, a deep sense of existential dread mixed with a rising, irrational paranoia. He found himself glancing at Jax, a fleeting, ugly thought whispering that the surgeon might hoard the neuroblockers. He crushed the thought, recognizing the weapon's signature. It was a poison of the soul. With a piercing shriek of a plasma torch, a section of the pod's wall glowed cherry red and then fell away, revealing the ship beyond. The contrast was breathtaking. After a lifetime of rust, grime, and decay, the corridor before them was a monument to sterile perfection. The walls were a soft, matte white that seemed to absorb sound. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and nothing. There were no pipes, no conduits, no seams, just smooth, elegant, funereal architecture. It was less a machine and more a tomb. As they stepped out, the floor lighting up in a soft, glowing pathway before them, a mechanical voice, calm and devoid of emotion, echoed through the hall. Containment breach detected in Sector Gamma 7. Unidentified biological contaminants registered. Deploying sterilization protocols. White panels in the walls slid open, and from them emerged not soldiers, but drones. They were sleek, chrome machines that floated on silent grav lifts, multi-jointed arms ending in surgical-looking instruments. They weren't weapons of war. They were instruments of cleansing. Kalen didn't hesitate. He raised the pulse rifle he'd scavenged from the colony's armory. A heavy, brutalist piece of hardware, and fired. The blast of kinetic energy, designed to shatter rock, hit the first drone and sent it careening into the far wall, a crumpled wreck. The other drones paused, their optical sensors glowing red. Their programming hadn't accounted for this level of resistance. It was the pause he needed. Anya, find a network access point. I need a map. Jax, keep Alara stable. Stay behind me. He moved with the fluid, lethal grace that the compact had beaten into him. He was a creature of chaos and violence in this temple of order. He used the corners for cover, his shots precise, disabling the drone's mobility drivers. He wasn't trying to destroy them, he was crippling them, sowing confusion. This wasn't a battle, it was a ghost's infiltration. Got it, Anya hissed, her fingers flying as she jacked her datapad into a wall panel that had slid open. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. Schematics of the ship flooded her screen. This isn't a warship. Kalen, it's a research vessel. The Vigil. I'm seeing biolabs, psychological monitoring suites, data cores, and a central broadcast antenna. That's our target. Deep in the ship's core, shielded 6 ways from Sunday. She paused, her face paling. And I'm in their network. I can see what they're monitoring. She turned the data pad towards him. On the screen was a live feed of the graveyard. Not a visual feed, but a horrifyingly intricate biotelemetry display. 1,000 life signs, each one a flickering light, each one tagged with cascading data streams, heart rate, adrenal levels, neural decay percentage, emotional state classified into categories of terror, rage, and sorrow. They were watching a city die, not with eyes, but with numbers, charting its demise on a graph. His own name was on the list, along with Anya's and Jax's. They were flagged as anomalous resistance. They're not just testing a weapon, Jax whispered, his voice thick with revulsion as he looked over Anya's shoulder. They're taking notes. The rage in Kalen solidified into a purpose so sharp it could have cut diamonds. This was no longer just about survival. It was about erasure. He would not just stop this. He would burn it from history, along with everyone responsible. Where are the crew, he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Anya's fingers danced across the screen. Minimal crew. They call themselves auditors, mostly concentrated in the central observation deck, 2 levels above the broadcast core. The rest of the ship is automated. Get us there, Kalen ordered. And find me a way to talk to this whole damn ship. They moved deeper into the pristine labyrinth. A small, dirty wound in a sterile body. The ship's defenses adapted. Force fields flickered to life in corridors, forcing them into detours. Sections of the deck would magnetize, trying to pin them in place. But Anya was always a step ahead, a ghost in their machine, rerouting power, creating false alarms, turning the ship's own systems against itself. She was a saboteur in her element, a gleeful vandal in a library. They reached the observation deck's main access corridor to find their way blocked by 2 figures. They weren't soldiers. They wore the same seamless white uniforms as the ship, their faces pale and impassive. One was a tall, thin man with eyes that seemed too old for his face. The other, a woman with her hair pulled back in a severe, perfect bun. They held no weapons. The man raised a hand, not in surrender, but in a gesture one might use to calm a frightened animal. "You are the Kalen anomaly," he stated, his voice the same calm, mechanical tone as the ship's computer. "Your resistance pattern is fascinating. A deviation of 97.3% from the projected psychological collapse model." The woman tilted her head. "The damage to the vessel is regrettable, but the data we are gathering from your unscheduled intrusion is invaluable. We must ask that you cease your destructive progress and submit to analysis." They weren't talking to a man. They were talking to a data point. Kalen felt a cold smile touch his lips. He had seen this before. This sociopathic detachment in the service of a greater good. It was the foundation of the compact. "I have a counter-proposal," he said, and fired, not at them, but at the ceiling panel above them. A shower of sparks and wiring rained down as a fire suppression system engaged, flooding the corridor with thick, white foam. In the chaos, he charged. The auditors were not fighters. They were academics, observers. They flinched, their composure shattering in the face of raw, physical violence. He slammed the tall man against the wall, the impact echoing in the sudden quiet. He disarmed the woman before she could even activate the personal energy shield on her wrist. He held the barrel of his rifle under the man's chin. The hymn, Kalen growled. The counter-frequency. Now. The auditor stared at him, and for the first time, a flicker of an emotion crossed his face, clinical curiosity. Why do you cling so desperately to a consciousness that is already compromised, to memories that are demonstrably flawed? The hymn is not a weapon. It is a tool of purification. It erases the pain of individuality, the chaos of emotion. It offers peace. Kalen's finger tightened on the trigger. I am not interested in your peace. From behind him, Anya's voice was sharp. Kalen, I've got it. I'm in their primary comms system. The whole ship can hear you. Kalen didn't look away from the auditor's eyes. He keyed his own comm unit to the channel Anya had opened. His voice, raw and amplified, boomed through the pristine corridors of the Vigil. A contagion of fury in a sterile world. To the crew of this vessel, he began, his words dripping with contempt. You came to our home, a place where they send the forgotten to die quietly, and you turned it into a slaughterhouse. You sit in your clean, white rooms and watch us go mad, taking notes while mothers forget their children's faces. You call us contaminants. You call our minds flawed. But you are the sickness. You are the rot that hides behind the name of progress. We are the cure. He shoved the auditor away and turned to his small, battered crew. The broadcast core was just below them. The final battle was coming. Let's go show them what flawed minds can do. The descent to the broadcast core was a journey into the ship's heart of darkness. The pristine, white corridors gave way to a colder, more functional design of gunmetal gray and pulsing conduits of blue light. The air grew heavy, humming with the contained power of a small star. The ship, no longer treating them as a mere contamination, began to fight back with lethal intent. Automated defense turrets, previously hidden behind seamless wall panels, emerged with the silent, deadly grace of unfolding metallic flowers. They fired beams of focused energy that could sublimate a meter of steel in an instant. This was no longer a sterilization protocol. This was an extermination. The fight became a brutal, running ballet of cover and suppression. Kalen was a whirlwind of motion, his pulse rifle a blunt instrument against the ship's surgical precision. He'd learned long ago that against a superior technological foe, you didn't fight the weapon, you fought the system. He aimed for the turret's delicate sensor arrays, the power conduits in the ceiling, the articulated joints of their mounting arms. He created chaos, forcing the ship's central AI to constantly recalculate, to divert resources, to second-guess itself. It was the only language the compact's machine logic understood. Jax, his hands now steady with a surge of adrenaline and a grim sense of purpose, was their shield. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew anatomy, and the drones and turrets were just a different kind of body. He'd call out weak points he spotted with his surgeon's eye. Base of the turret mount, there's an unshielded power converter. Go for the neck. Kalen, he kept Ilara moving, half carrying the still-dazed comms tech, while his other hand wielded a plasma pistol with surprising accuracy, his shots methodical and aimed. Anya, meanwhile, was their sword, tethered to the ship's network. She fought a war on a completely different battlefield. Her fingers were a blur across her datapad as she battled the Vigil's security AI. Closing blast doors in Corridor Delta 9, she'd shout. And a second later, a heavy metal door would slam shut behind them, cutting off pursuing drones. I'm rerouting atmospheric controls. Enjoy the nitrogen flush, you bastards. The lights would flicker, and a section of the corridor ahead would fill with a blinding white vapor as the ship's life support was momentarily turned against itself. She was a gremlin in the ghost machine, a virus of pure, spiteful chaos. But the ship was learning. The AI was adapting, anticipating their moves, hardening its defenses. The corridors began to reconfigure, walls shifting to create dead ends, forcing them down paths that led directly into ambush points. It was a sentient, malevolent maze. They were breaching the final security checkpoint before the core when the ship unleashed its true guardians. They weren't drones. They were men, clad in form-fitting, midnight black armor. They moved with a silent, synchronized efficiency that made Kalen's blood run cold. They carried no rifles, only long, slender blades that hummed with a contained energy field. Phantoms, the Compact's elite enforcers, the successors to his own Echo program. They were the reason he was in the graveyard. He had refused to become one of them, to trade his last shred of humanity for their cold, cybernetic perfection. Anya, get that door open, he snarled, shoving her and Jax towards the core's blast door. This is my fight. The two phantoms didn't speak. They didn't need to. They moved in perfect unison, a fluid dance of death, their energy blades weaving a lethal web of light. Kalen was outmatched. His pulse rifle was too slow, too clumsy. He discarded it, drawing the only other weapon he had, a combat knife, a single piece of sharpened, blackened alloy. It was a relic, a primitive tool against their technological elegance, but it was an extension of his will. The fight was savage and brief. He was faster than they expected, more brutal. He didn't fight with their clean, precise fencing style. He fought like a cornered animal, using his fists, his feet, the environment itself. He dodged a sweeping strike that would have cut him in half and slammed his shoulder into the lead phantom's chest, driving him back against a conduit. The phantom's blade sizzled as it shorted out against the raw power current. Kalen drove his knife into the armored joint of the phantom's neck, a brutal, desperate thrust. The man shuddered and collapsed. The second phantom was on him instantly, its blade scoring a deep, cauterized gash across Kalen's ribs. The pain was a white-hot explosion. He gritted his teeth, ignoring it, and lunged forward, not away from the blade, but into its wielder. He crashed into the phantom, wrapping his arms around him, a suicidal embrace. He used the phantom's own momentum to slam them both against the blast door, just as Anya's datapad chimed with a triumphant beep. The massive door began to slide open behind them. Kalen held on, the phantom's blade now buried deep in his shoulder, the pain so immense it was almost abstract. He stared into the phantom's emotionless helmet. "You forgot what we were taught," Kalen rasped, blood flecking his lips. Victory, at any cost. He twisted, using the last of his strength to shove the phantom sideways, directly into the path of the grinding, multi-ton door. There was a horrific crunch of metal and bone, and then silence. Kalen fell to his knees, clutching his shoulder, the phantom's energy blade still embedded in him, its power source now dead. Jax was at his side in an instant, a dermal regenerator hissing as he worked to seal the wound. Damn it. Kalen, you're not an army. Had to be. Kalen grunted, forcing himself to his feet. His vision swam. The broadcast core lay before them, It was a cathedral of data and energy. A colossal, crystalline structure pulsed at the center of the spherical chamber, a lattice of light that was the source of the hymn. It was beautiful, elegant, and the most obscene thing Kalen had ever seen. Floating around it in zero gravity were several more auditors, cocooned in what looked like translucent control pods, their minds directly interfaced with the broadcast. They were the choir, singing their song of psychic death to the world below. "Anya, can you reverse it?" Kalen gasped, leaning against the doorframe. "Can you broadcast a cure?" Anya's face was grim as she scanned the energy readings. "No, the system isn't designed for that. It's a one-way street, a focused weapon. I can't rewrite its fundamental function from here." But a dark, determined light entered her eyes. "I can change the song." She plugged her datapad into the core's primary control console. Her fingers began to move with a speed that was almost inhuman. On the main view screen, which had been displaying the vital signs of Erebus, a new data stream began to form. It wasn't telemetry. It was raw data, pulled from the ship's own logs, financial records, encrypted communications, project proposals signed by the highest-ranking members of the Compact High Council. It was the truth. The entire history of the HIM project, from its inception as a non-lethal pacification tool to its current deployment as a method of clearing inconvenient colonial populations without the messy optics of a military invasion. It was a detailed, undeniable record of a state-sanctioned genocide. "What are you doing?" Jax asked, his voice hushed with awe. "The ship is still broadcasting to Erebus," Anya said, her eyes locked on the cascading code. "But its long-range comms array is slave to the same power source. I'm piggybacking, pushing all of this." She made a grand gesture at the screen full of damning evidence, out to every convoy, every civilian channel, every military network, from here to the core worlds. "I'm turning their weapon of silence into a megaphone." The central crystal began to pulse with a new rhythm, a frantic, angry red. Alarms blared throughout the chamber. On the view screen, the auditors in their pods began to convulse, their bodies spasming as their minds were flooded with a truth they had so clinically ignored. The ship itself seemed to groan in protest, the very walls vibrating as its primary function was corrupted. A new message began to broadcast from the Vigil, overriding the hymn. It wasn't a counter-frequency. It wasn't a cure. It was Kalen's voice, recorded during his speech in the corridor, now amplified and sent screaming across the stars. "You are the sickness. You are the rot." Followed by a torrent of raw, irrefutable data that exposed the Compact's deepest, darkest secret. A calm, female voice echoed through the chamber, this one tinged with the first hint of something other than placid control fury. "Chief Auditor, heiress to all hands. The contaminants have reached the core. They have compromised the project. Scuttle the vessel. I repeat, scuttle the vessel. The purity of the data must be maintained. Erase everything." Red lights bathed the core in a hellish glow. A countdown timer appeared on the main screen, 5 minutes until the ship's reactor would overload and vaporize everything within 1,000 kilometers. "We need to go," Jax yelled, grabbing Kalen's arm. "Now." But Kalen was staring at the main console. At the data stream, Anya was still pushing out. "Is it all there?" he asked, his voice calm. "Everything. The names, the authorizations." Anya nodded, her face slick with sweat. "Every last bloody word. They'll hear it. All of them." "Good," Kalen said. He looked at the countdown. 4 minutes. Then he looked at the open blast door, the long, dark corridor that led back to the splintered remains of their pod. Escape seemed impossible, but as he looked at the faces of his small, broken crew, the cynical engineer, the disgraced doctor, the traumatized tech, he felt something he hadn't felt since before the wars, before he became an echo. It wasn't hope. It was a sense of rightness, of a debt finally paid. "Then our work here is done," he said. The ship shuddered violently, a deep, structural groan that signaled the beginning of the end. They had kicked the hornet's nest, and now the nest was going to burn. The ship was dying. It wasn't the clean, orderly process of a planned scuttling. It was a violent, convulsive death throw. Power conduits exploded in showers of incandescent sparks. Entire sections of the corridor vented atmosphere into the void with a deafening roar. And the ship's AI, corrupted and panicked, began turning systems on and off at random. The calm, mechanical voice that had once governed the vessel was now a babbling, looping stream of error messages and security alerts. It was a machine having a nervous breakdown. "We're not making it back to the pod," Anya yelled over the cacophony, her hands braced against the vibrating walls. "The route we took is gone. Sector Gamma is a vacuum." Kalen's mind, honed by years of impossible situations, was already processing, calculating, searching for a path through the chaos. The pain in his shoulder was a dull, persistent fire, but the adrenaline was a tidal wave, washing it away, leaving only a cold, sharp clarity. He looked at the main schematic, still flickering on Anya's datapad. "The biolabs," he said, pointing to a section 2 decks below them. "They're shielded, environmentally isolated. If they have external hatches, we can get out." External hatches for what Jax demanded, trying to keep a whimpering Ilara from collapsing, to jettison failed experiments. What else? Kalen's voice was grim. "This whole ship is a monument to cleaning up mistakes. They'd have a garbage chute. We just need to be the right kind of garbage." It was a desperate, insane plan, but it was the only one they had. They plunged back into the disintegrating labyrinth, the countdown timer a phantom presence at their backs. The ship seemed to be actively trying to kill them now. Gravity plates would flicker, sending them tumbling in 0G for a terrifying moment before slamming them back to the deck. Defense turrets, their targeting systems fried, fired wildly, scything down corridors with beams of destructive energy. They navigated the maelstrom, a 4-person embodiment of sheer stubborn will. They found the biolabs behind a heavy quarantine door that Anya managed to pry open with a focused plasma burst. The contrast was as jarring as the one when they had first boarded. Inside, all was calm, sterile, silent. Rows of stasis tubes lined the walls, each one containing a grotesque parody of life. Failed clones, genetically engineered creatures, things that defied categorization, all floating in a clear, nutrient-rich fluid. It was a gallery of the compact's hubris. In the center of the main lab was a large, circular hatch in the floor, marked with a universal biohazard symbol, the disposal chute. Anya confirmed, interfacing with the local control panel. It leads directly to an external port. It's designed for rapid, high-pressure expulsion of contaminated materials. "So we get shot out into space," Jax said flatly. "That's the plan." "It's better than being atomized," Kalen countered. "Anya, can you control the launch? We need to aim ourselves back towards Erebus. It's our only chance." Anya's face was pale. "Aiming isn't the problem. The launch will be explosive, and we have no pod, no shielding, just our suits. Their environmental suits, scavenged from the graveyard, were little more than glorified work overalls, designed to protect against toxic dust, not the hard vacuum and radiation of open space. "There's no choice," Kalen said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Get it open." As Anya worked, a new voice, sharp and female, cut through the ship's dying babble. It was the chief auditor, Eris, her voice no longer calm but serrated with cold, intellectual fury. She was broadcasting on a localized, high-priority channel. "To the Kalen anomaly. You have failed to grasp the scale of your actions. You think you have broadcast truth. You have broadcast chaos. The compact maintains stability for trillions, a stability that requires difficult, sometimes regrettable, actions. The data on the HIM was not a secret to be exposed. It was a burden to be carried by those strong enough to bear it. A section of the far wall became a view screen, showing a live image of the chief auditor on the ship's bridge. She was a severe-looking woman with intelligent, merciless eyes, standing calmly amidst a scene of utter chaos as her crew scrambled to escape or contain the damage. Her gaze seemed to bore right through the screen, directly at Kalen. "You have torn down the wall that kept the monsters out. You foolish, sentimental man. And, for that, you will not be allowed a quick death in the fire of the ship. You will be given a front row seat to the consequences of your truth." The floor hatch hissed open, revealing not the blackness of space, but a brightly lit, sterile launch tube. "What is she talking about?" Jax asked, his eyes wide. Before Kalen could answer, the ship gave a violent, final lurch. The lights died, replaced by the hellish red glow of the emergency alerts. The countdown timer had vanished, replaced by the words "Reactor integrity critical. Imminent breach." "She's not trying to kill us with the explosion," Anya realized, her voice a horrified whisper. "She's trying to strand us. She's accelerating the scuttle." They had seconds. "Go," Kalen yelled, shoving the others towards the open chute. Now Ilara went first, then Jax, then Anya. Kalen was the last to the edge. He took one final look at the screen, at the face of Chief Auditor Eris, a woman who embodied everything he had once fought for and now fought against. Her expression was one of absolute, unwavering certainty. She truly believed she was in the right. That was the most terrifying thing of all. He jumped. The hatch sealed above him, and for a heart-stopping moment, they were in free fall in a narrow, white tube. Then, a blast of pressurized gas erupted from behind them, a silent, titanic force that fired them out into the void like a cork from a bottle. The transition was brutal. One moment, they were inside a dying machine. The next, they were adrift in the infinite, silent emptiness of space. The Vigil, a sleek, black sliver against the bruised backdrop of Erebus's atmosphere, was already shrinking behind them. They tumbled end over end, 4 insignificant specks of human debris. "My suit's leaking." Jax's voice crackled over the comm, strained with panic. "Puncture in the leg. Trying to seal it. My oxygen levels are dropping," Anya added, her own voice tight. Kalen fought to control his spin, using the tiny thrusters on his work suit, which were meant for minor course corrections in a mine shaft, not navigating open space. He finally managed to stabilize himself, his magnetic boots finding no purchase in the nothingness. He looked back. The Vigil did not explode in a dramatic fireball. Instead, a point of impossibly bright, pure white light appeared at its center. The light expanded, silently, gracefully, swallowing the ship in an instant. It was a clean, sterile erasure, just like the compact itself. The light continued to expand, a silent, perfect sphere of annihilation, a shockwave, not of sound, but of pure energy and radiation, washed over them. Kalen felt a searing heat on his back, and every alarm on his suit's pathetic display screamed at once. Radiation warning, proximity alert, bio sign critical. Then, mercifully, the suit's systems overloaded and went dark, plunging him into silence. He was blind, deaf, and utterly alone, tumbling through the dark. He did not know if the others were alive or dead. He did not know if his suit's life support was still functioning. He only knew that he was falling endlessly towards the gray, dusty shroud of the graveyard below. Time ceased to have meaning. There was only the sensation of falling, the faint, desperate rasp of his own breathing, and the image of Chief Auditor Eris's face burned into his mind. You will be given a front-row seat to the consequences. What had she meant? What had she done in those final moments? The answer came as he drifted back into the upper layers of Erebus's atmosphere. His suit's comm system, rebooting from the energy surge, crackled back to life. It wasn't Jax's voice or Anya's. It was a cacophony, 1,000 voices, a chorus of humanity, screaming, crying, and, most chillingly, laughing. They were the voices of the colony, the 1,000 souls of the graveyard. The hymn was gone. The psychic scream that had driven them mad had been silenced when the Vigil was destroyed, but what was left in its place was not peace. It was not a return to sanity. The auditor had been right. He had torn down the wall. The hymn had not just been a weapon. It had been a cage. It had suppressed their minds, but it had also contained them. Now, their minds were free, but they were also shattered. The memories, the personalities, the very identities that the hymn had eroded were not returning. They were gone forever. What remained were the raw, primal emotions that had been churning beneath the surface, the terror, the rage, the paranoia, the grief. The graveyard was no longer a laboratory of quiet madness. It had become an asylum of 1,000 screaming souls, a world of pure, unadulterated id. Kalen watched, a helpless god falling from a self-made heaven, as the lights of the colony below began to move in frantic, chaotic patterns. He saw the orange bloom of explosions, the red streaks of fires. The colonists, free from the song, but trapped in the wreckage of their minds, had turned on each other with a ferocity born of absolute terror. He had not saved them. He had simply changed the nature of their hell. He had stopped the experiment, but had left the lab rats to tear each other apart. This was Eris's final lesson. This was the consequence of his truth. He had exposed the compact's crime, but in doing so, he had utterly destroyed the very people he had been fighting to save. The fall was an exercise in futility. Kalen was no longer a soldier or a ghost. He was a meteor, a piece of meat wrapped in failing technology, surrendering to gravity's cold embrace. His suit was a coffin, its systems dead, the internal display a blank, black mirror reflecting only the terror in his own eyes. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the storm of recrimination raging in his mind. He had traded a controlled psychic hell for a physical, chaotic one. He had freed the prisoners only to burn down the prison with them still inside. It was not justice. It was a different flavor of damnation. It was Anya's voice that pierced the veil. A weak, static-laced miracle. Aelin, do you read faint signal or rerouting emergency power from the leg servos? Talk to me, you stubborn bastard. Life. Hope. He fumbled with his helmet controls, his fingers clumsy and numb. Anya, I'm here. Status Jax is with me. His suit is compromised but holding. We're maybe half a click east of you. Ilara. Her tether snapped during the shockwave. Her signal is gone. The words were a physical blow. Ilara, the quiet tech, the one truly innocent soul among them, was now just another ghost to haunt this cursed world. There was no time to mourn. The ground, a churning sea of gray dust and jagged rock, was rushing up to meet them with terminal velocity. Can you control the descent? Kalen grunted, forcing the words out. The thrusters are slag. Anya shot back. But the boots still have magnetic charge. If we can time it right, hit one of the old ore freighters in the shipbreaking yard. The magnetic plating might slow us down enough to not be paced. It was a plan with 1,000 ways to die, and only one, infinitesimally small, way to live. It was their only shot. Through the swirling dust, Kalen could just make out the skeletal remains of the freighters, colossal metal carcasses half buried in the gray landscape. He angled his body, a pathetic attempt at aerodynamics, and braced for the end. The impact was not the clean finality of the Vigil's end. It was a messy, brutal, grinding collision. His magnetic boots latched onto the freighter's hull for a fraction of a second, the sudden deceleration tearing his joints and threatening to rip his legs from his torso. He was then thrown, tumbling down the rusted, angled plating, bouncing off gantries and support beams before finally coming to rest in a deep drift of soft, bone-gray dust at the base of the wreck. For a long time, he just lay there, listening to the frantic, ragged symphony of his own heart. He was alive. He had survived the cannon, the ship, the explosion, and the fall. He had survived everything but his own conscience. Pushing himself to his feet, he saw the full scope of his new reality. The perpetual twilight of Erebus was now lit by the flickering, hellish glow of dozens of fires. The air, once filled with the low hum of machinery, now carried the sounds of raw, animalistic madness, screams, not of pain, but of pure, undiluted rage and terror, echoed from the habitat domes. He saw a man, his face a mask of ecstatic fury, methodically smashing the viewport of a ground transport with a chunk of metal. He saw a small group of people tearing one of their own apart with their bare hands, their movements jerky and devoid of human reason. This was Eris's front row seat. This was the consequence of a truth delivered to minds unprepared to receive it. He found Anya and Jax huddled in the shadow of a massive engine block. Jax working desperately to patch the leaks in his suit as Anya scanned the horizon with a grim expression. "They're not people anymore," Jax whispered, his voice trembling. He, the healer, the man who believed in saving everyone, was looking at a plague of the soul for which there was no cure. Their consciousness is gone. It's just the raw nerves left, firing at random. "We can't stay here," Anya said, her pragmatism a shield against the horror. "We need shelter, a defensible position, before they notice us." They moved through the outskirts of the dying colony like phantoms, Shadows in a city of lunatics. The madness was not uniform. Some colonists were violent, but others were lost in catatonic loops, staring at nothing, walking in endless circles, or weeping for memories they no longer possessed. It was a world of broken dolls, and Kalen felt the weight of every single one. His guilt was a physical thing, heavier than any armor, sharper than any blade. They found their sanctuary where it had all begun, the ore launcher complex. Its thick, reinforced walls and isolated position made it the most defensible structure on the planet. They sealed the main blast door, the deep boom echoing the closing of a tomb, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, they were safe from the immediate chaos. But the sound still permeated the walls, a constant, maddening reminder of the world they had created. In the dim light of the control room, the three survivors looked at each other. They were battered, bleeding, and haunted. "What now, Jax?" asked, his voice hollow. "We exposed the compact, just to die here at the hands of the people we tried to save." "What was the point?" "The point was the truth," Anya countered, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. "The galaxy knows what the compact did. That has to matter." "Tell that to them," Jax said, gesturing vaguely at the walls, at the chorus of the damned outside. Kalen had been silent, his gaze fixed on the schematic of the launcher on the main console. He had been the instrument of this destruction, his rage the catalyst. But rage was a fire, and fire could either consume or it could forge. He had spent his life as a weapon, a tool of deconstruction. Perhaps it was time to build. Eris was wrong, he said, his voice quiet but firm. The other two looked at him. She believed that without the compact's brutal order, there is only this. He gestured to the world outside. She believed that humanity is a monster that must be kept in a cage. She was wrong. He walked to the main power conduit for the launcher. "We can't fix their minds. We can't bring back what the hymn burned away. But we can offer them an alternative to the chaos. We can give them an anchor." Anya's eyes widened as she understood. The launcher's beacon. It has a short range, wide band frequency. It's used for orbital docking. "We'll turn it into a lighthouse," Kalen said, a new, unfamiliar energy in his voice. It wasn't the cold fire of vengeance, but the slow, steady burn of purpose. Not a song of control, just a signal, a constant, steady pulse, something to focus on, a pattern in the madness. It was a desperate gamble, a piece of battlefield psychology applied to an entire world. They worked for hours, a new energy coursing through them. Anya rewired the beacon, bypassing its automated protocols and linking it to the comm system. Jax, the surgeon, suggested the content. Not words, not orders, music. He found an old, archived file in the colony's server, a simple, elegant piece of classical music for a string quartet. It was ordered, mathematical, yet beautiful. It was the antithesis of the chaos outside. Kalen climbed to the highest point of the launcher, to the watch post where his long exile had begun, and manually aligned the broadcast dish, aiming it not at the sky, but at the heart of the colony. When Anya activated the broadcast, there was no immediate change. The screaming continued, but then, slowly, subtly, the rhythm of the chaos began to shift. The constant, ordered melody began to cut through the noise. It was a single, sane voice in a world of madness. From the watchpost, Kalen saw it first. A lone figure, who had been banging their head against a wall, stopped. They tilted their head, listening. Then another. A small group, locked in a violent struggle, fell apart, their rage seemingly forgotten as they looked toward the source of the sound. It wasn't a cure. It wasn't a miracle. But it was a start. A flicker of order in an ocean of entropy. As twilight deepened into the long, bruised night of Erebus, they saw figures begin to move towards the launcher. They were slow, hesitant, drawn by the music. They weren't cured. They were still broken. But they were no longer just screaming. They were listening. For the first time, there was something other than madness in the air. As the first dozen colonists gathered at the base of the sealed blast door, drawn to the music like moths to a distant flame, a new light appeared in the sky. It was not the silent, malevolent star of the Vigil. It was a ship, bulky and functional. A freighter from the outer rim, its running lights blinking a standard civilian call sign. It descended slowly, cautiously, its searchlights cutting through the dust. A voice, clear and human, crackled over the open comm channel they had used for their broadcast. "This is the freighter Stray Dog out of the Cygnus colonies. We receive the broadcast. The truth. We are not alone. Are there any survivors of Erebus Kalen?" Looked from the approaching ship to the shattered souls gathered below. His broadcast had been heard. The truth hadn't just brought chaos. It had brought allies. It had started a fire far beyond this one dead world. He stood on the watchtower, the cool, ordered music washing over him, the gray dust swirling at his feet. He was no longer a warden of a graveyard. He was the keeper of a sanctuary, a shepherd to a flock of broken minds. The war wasn't over. The galaxy was fractured, and the fight for its soul had just begun. He had not erased his guilt, but he had forged it into a new responsibility. He had answered Eris's challenge not with words, but with an action. He had shown her that when the cage is broken, what emerges is not just a monster, but the stubborn, defiant, and unbreakable will to build a better one. He looked out at the horizon, at the coming dawn that never truly came, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt the faint, unfamiliar stirrings of peace. The work had just begun.